Okay, nobody wants to settle down, get the seats. Okay, so good afternoon everyone. My name is Sarah Winfield. I'm a consultant obstetrician, maternal medicine lead at Mid-Yorkshire Trust, and I have to say it's so nice to see so many familiar faces here this afternoon. I've had lots of hugs and kisses in a very appropriate way obviously, but I'm really delighted. So thank you for having me. Thank you to the MEaCC team and to Debbie and the crew for having me to chair this afternoon's session. So we have an excellent session this afternoon, and what I'm going to do is welcome each speaker to the stage in turn. So our next speaker is Brian Wilkinson. Brian has spoken this morning. You know about him. He's a Sunderland supporter. I'm a Geordie, but we're still friends. You know, that it's rare. I like him enough to still be his mate. So Brian's going to talk to us about recognition and management of the deteriorating patient, facilitating aims and prompt CiPP training within units. Brian, the floor's yours. Thank you.
Perfect. Hello, everyone, again. So I'm going to talk about the training side of things, and I'd just like you to think back to a slide I presented this morning where even in our region, where we've fully embraced MEaCC, we've suffered the same challenges as in many places around the country with regards to staffing, and in particular that impacts on delivering training from our midwives in enhanced maternity care. And one of my colleagues in Leeds, Bex Lathy, is going to talk about the other side of it, which is training ICU nurses in some aspects of midwifery. And I think that's really important because broadly, unless you change a model by which care is delivered, you're unlikely to change the outcomes that occur within that system. Starting with some declarations, I have no financial conflict of interest with this talk, but I've got lots of vested interest in managing deterioration, and then I've got a number of trust roles, and I also teach for a couple of universities with regards to critical care and some aspects of maternal critical care. I'm a course director for maternal AIM and for prompt CiPP locally, but I've got no involvement with the national team, and I just want to make it clear that any positives or perceived criticisms are very much my personal reviews rather than reflecting a wider body. So as has been mentioned this morning, really the NHS strategy for managing deterioration is broken down into this four-part framework of PIA, so plan, prepare, prevent, identification, escalation and response. And some people talk about deterioration in a couple of ways. So those who like talking as if it was a nervous system, you can talk about an afferent limb, which is where information goes into the system, and that focuses on how we recognise people who are deteriorating. And then people talk about an efferent limb, or the response limb, which is what we do about it, because really the first stage is identifying that someone is poorly. But you're only going to make a difference if that changes the model of care or changes what you're going to do. And that's why how we train midwives, obstetricians, anaesthetists, how we deliver enhanced maternity care, how we deliver maternal critical care are all important in terms of changing our response to deterioration. And as Debbie has alluded to, you've seen this slide previously, that essentially we're always faced with a compromise in the setting of an unwell pregnant woman, in that no single area within the hospital has a single set of clinicians who can deliver all of the skills that are required. So multidisciplinary working is required, but generally if there's a baby on board and there's a reasonable chance that that baby is going to be delivered, you're almost certainly better off in the maternity setting with additional support coming in as required. And that's why the provision of enhanced maternity care is so important. So this is from the national document that was released earlier this year, coordinated by the Intensive Care Society but approved by a number of other royal colleges and bodies, looking at how we deliver enhanced maternity care, with the aims they're really about, and the one I want to focus on is bringing multi-professional skills and experience together to bridge the gap between ward-level care and critical care. And broadly, if you were going to sit and design a training model from baseline, you'd probably think about three things. So how good is the training experience and what are people going to take away from that? How much does it cost? And there's an upfront cost in that there might be a cost for a course or a cost per delegate, but there's obviously opportunity costs that come with that. And whenever we do something in the NHS, there's an impact on service provision. So you've got to make a decision about, do you take a one-day hit that has a big disruptive impact on your service, or do you try and train a couple of people a week over a much longer period of time, but that might make it much more difficult to get to a critical mass of people trained. And there are a number of outstanding courses available nationally that can teach enhanced maternal care. So Baby Lifeline run a course. It's a one-day course, and you can see from the feedback that's up there, highly recommended by the delegates, experienced faculty. But a general place on this course, and Baby Lifeline will commission an enhanced maternity course for your organisation, is roughly in the order of about £150 to £180 per place. And really, to make a viable course, you're probably looking at 15 to 20 delegates. So there's a significant one-off expenditure. Now, if you've got some end-of-year overspend, that might be an excellent way of getting a lot of bang for your buck in a single day. But you have to weigh that up against how you're going to deliver the service on that day if a significant proportion of your staff are undergoing that training. There are also universities that are operating typically level 7, so master's level courses. The University of Bradford, which I give a plug to because I do a small amount of teaching for this one, but also one at the University of Plymouth. So there are master's level modules in enhanced maternity care that can act as a sort of form of continuous professional development and can seek to build on some of the more basic training that might be delivered on other courses. The proposed model that we went for in Bradford is that we started with an aim. And our aim was, as I talked about earlier, we could model that broadly it is more likely than not that on every shift we will have a woman requiring enhanced maternal care. So our goal was, can we have one midwife per shift in the numbers, so not separate. Ultimately, if there's no one requiring enhanced maternity care, they're a midwife who'll be able to contribute to the wider activity of the unit. But can we have one designated midwife where if we have a woman requiring enhanced maternity care, they're the first in line to go and look after them? And how do we deliver training in that regard? So Debbie talked about having standard and enhanced competencies. And really, standard is a really important part of it. And I firmly believe that everyone should have the opportunity to undergo standard competencies in recognising deterioration. And I have no doubt that the National Maternity Early Warning Score is going to make a massive difference in that regard. But that's the recognition bit. The next question is, what's the response bit? What do we do once we've identified that someone is just not right or their observations are off? And Maternal AIM is a course that we've found is very useful at providing an introductory level knowledge, and I'll go through that in a bit more detail over the subsequent slides, really with the goal that all of our midwives have the opportunity to undergo maternal AIM training. When's the easiest time to train all of your midwives in maternal AIM? Well, ideally undergraduate, and we're in negotiations to discuss that, or in the supernumerary period where they're not in the numbers and it's much easier to take a larger cohort of midwives. But the trade-off is that the midwives are relatively fresh out of uni, they've got a relatively low level of clinical experience, and sometimes the different models on the course can be found more challenging by different individuals. But I think that if you want to deliver maternal AIM training to all of your midwives, the supernumerary period with some catch-ups is the easiest way of doing that. And then you look about the enhanced competencies. And the enhanced competencies, we've used a course called Prompt CiPP, which again I'll outline in a bit more detail, and then tried to build on that with some consolidation experience within critical care, and then looking at how we then deliver continuing professional development to our midwives once they've undergone that training. So AIM, or Acute Illness Management, is part of a suite of courses that is run by Greater Manchester Critical Care Skills Institute, and it's a one-day course that focuses on something called an A to E model of assessment. So when we approach someone, and it's very familiar to doctors, because doctors are trained across a whole number of different life support courses, so advanced life support, advanced trauma life support, MOE that we do, airway, breathing, circulation, disability, environment and exposure. That's covered to some extent on basic life support courses, but it is a relatively new focus to to the midwives who come on the course. And one thing that we tend to find when people come on the course and you give them this new model of assessment is that they tend to forget that they're a midwife. So they tend to do all the new bits that we ask them to do, and they don't listen into the baby, or they don't put a CTG monitor on. So there's a bit of, actually, this course is really good, but you need to work out how you're going to build it into your clinical practice. It's a blend of lectures, workshops, and practical stations. It's really easy to run with 12 candidates per course, but it's quite faculty intensive. Generally, the optimal ratio is probably 16 to 20 candidates per course, and you need quite a lot of faculty to run it. The way that the course works, you can see the structure up here on the board. So it essentially starts with a bit of setting the scene, and all of the material within maternal aim comes from a CMACE report. But currently that's quite an old CMACE report. The fact I'm calling it CMACE rather than Embrace gives you an idea about how far back it's going, and the course is in the middle of a complete rewrite. But broadly, there's some lectures, then there's some small group workshops, then there's some practical skills stations, and then there is the dreaded assessment. And the assessment in maternal aim is actually pretty hard. So there's an MEaCC that you need to achieve 80% on, and there's a practical skills test that the vast majority of people will pass on either their first or their second go, and then there's some evaluations and certificates. So maternal aim is quite an intense course, and I'm just going to give you an example here about this is what one of the assessment scenarios looks like. But you can see the assessment tool is very explicit, and it tells you what people should do, what they shouldn't do, and they need to do enough of the candidate management side of things, which is the column on the right-hand side of the screen, in order to demonstrate that they've passed the assessment. So the advantages of maternal aim is it is a brilliant course for emphasising A to E management. And that is new, and it takes a bit of going, but I would say 95% of people quickly pick it up, and by the end of the course are conducting a much more thorough assessment in a structured way, rather than the natural thing if people don't have an A to E model and they're faced with someone unwell is that they do lots of things in a not particularly coherent order that doesn't necessarily deal with the most life-threatening issues first. The course manual is excellent, and because it requires a high faculty ratio, typically of 5 to 8 members of faculty, and the course hugely benefits from having obstetric, midwifery, ICU, critical care outreach and educator input, you tend to get a truly MDT feel in how it's delivered. The other big pro of maternal aim is that the licensing is free from Greater Manchester Critical Care Skills Institute, at least for the first 4 years. And because it uses a mixture of learning modalities, it suits a mixture of learning sides. The downside is that it's a hard day to organise, in that you need usually at least one plenary room, so a room big enough for 20 candidates plus an instructor, and then you need at least 3 breakout rooms, and you need some sort of low-level sim doll, and you need some basic kit in each room to be able to deliver it. The A to E assessment is an unfamiliar model, and you have to support some candidates to get comfortable with that, and sometimes it takes a bit of time. The materials are relatively fixed in that they're produced by the Greater Manchester Critical Care Skills Institute. They are undergoing a rewrite. They assure me that by the end of the year that rewrite will be complete, and certainly when you read the materials they are definitely due an update. And the summative assessment methodology to me feels utterly out of place on the course, in that I think that it will be much better replaced by just another scenario that's not pass-fail. Because I actually think that if you want to teach everyone this as a core set of skills, we probably shouldn't be doing it in a pass-fail way. That said, the vast majority of people who don't pass either the MEaCC or the assessment sit a retest and pass it subsequently. But I think it does add a bit of stress in that we just need to be cognizant of. And as you can see, that one of the benefits are that the AIM suite of courses are quite familiar. So this is just in our particular local region, but you can see that most providers have got a license for either maternal and or adult AIM, and the resus officers are pretty familiar with what they need to do in terms of delivering the course. So if you can get the physical infrastructure and the people to deliver it, usually it works well in that regard. Moving on to Prompt CiPP. So Prompt CiPP comes from the Prompt Foundation suite of courses run out of the Southwest. which stands for the care of the critically ill, pregnant or postpartum woman, so it's not that easy to say. It includes 5 lectures and then some skill stations, focusing more about the actual nuts and bolts of you've identified someone who's unwell, you've moved them to your enhanced maternity care area, what are the skills that we're going to need to be able to deliver care that differs from what we would consider to be standard maternity care. And the programme, in theory, it's a half-day course. I have to say that I think the lectures are quite long and intensive, and the skill stations are often comparatively short. So actually, I think it's more like 2/3 of a day. And if you deliver it as a full day of education, it would be perfect if you could stick a bit of simulation on the end of it to turn it into a sort of 9 a.m. till 4 p.m. training course that would be a full day. It's got low resource requirements. The course materials are excellent. It's part of the Prompt Foundation, which is good because Prompt is something that we're all familiar with because it forms part of the multidisciplinary training aspects that are required for the maternity incentive scheme. It's easy to deliver in that it typically only takes 2 or 3 members of faculty. It recommends the course director should be an anaesthetist with experience of critical care, and a critical care educator and a midwife is usually enough to deliver it quite nicely. But I think you need to recognise that if you give someone a lot of information on one day, you then need to consolidate and build on that and refresh that over time. Because if you get shown today, I could show you all how to flush through an arterial line transducer, but if you go 6 months before you see one, then it's unlikely that people are going to retain those skills without another model for keeping up to date. So we've then focused on some consolidation training, which is led by our critical care education team, where the midwives get the opportunity to come and spend a bit of time on ICU and a bit of time on critical care outreach. And hopefully that provides an opportunity to practice some line care, some documentation, some A to E assessments, as well as looking at things like arterial blood gases, bloods. And the goal is not to turn people into doctors, but ultimately it's also about there's a danger that you dumb down midwifery, and ultimately one of the great things about midwifery is that it's university level education, people have got skills and they've got experience, and ultimately we find that if we can integrate some additional knowledge into that, we end up delivering a better standard of care moving forwards to our most unwell women who remain in the labour ward setting. And this is an educational paradigm called Miller's Pyramid, which just discusses how you move essentially from novice to mastery across typically a skill. And what you can see is that quite nicely, AIM on the left-hand side of the screen and Prompt CiPP on the right-hand side of the screen sort of satisfy the multiple modalities. But in order to achieve that sort of true top level of mastery, you really need some independent practice looking after some unwell women, which fortunately the data shows that there's plenty of opportunity of that, as well as some continuing professional development. The other thing that I have to give a huge shout out to Becky and the team in Leeds is we've developed an enhanced maternity care competency passport. And the idea is that this breaks down the skills that are required for standard and for enhanced maternity care, and provides a training and skills record that's got the advantage that we can look and focus on continuing professional development, but also if you move between organisations, our goal would be that this would be recognised by the organisation that you move to, ultimately with the aim that, as you say, a sort of rising tide raises all boats up, that ultimately what we want is every organisation to be able to offer training to its midwives such that women who are unwell receive care from a midwife who has had advanced training in enhanced maternity care. So this just breaks down the difference in standard competency training and enhanced competency training. And standard is essentially covered by maternal AIM, and enhanced competency is covered by Prompt CiPP. So if you are planning on if you're currently in a position where you know that ultimately none of your midwives have had any training in enhanced maternity care, or some have, but it's a patchy service, and I think that is honestly the reality for the vast majority of places, then need to work out what your training summary is going to be. And what I'd encourage you to do is look at your available resources, The beauty of maternal aim and of prompt CiPP is that you will have people with the skills to teach that within your organisation. You just need to collaborate in order to work out how to deliver it. The licensing for both courses is free, so there's no cost in that regard. Indeed, the only cost, and I realise this is easy for me to say, and I'll get daggers from all the heads of midwifery in the room, but the only cost really is being able to free clinical staff from a day of clinical work and still provide a safe service, and I am cognisant of the balance for that. I think collaborating between organisations makes a big difference, and we plan to run a collaborative course between Leeds and Bradford in December, because then you're only needing half of the number of people from the training side from each organisation and half of the number of candidates from each organisation, so you have less single-day service disruption, and then work out what your plan for developing and maintaining your skills are. But if you've got critical care within your organisation, you will have a critical care education team, and I would encourage you to get in touch with them. Thank you very much.